This is the Open University.
Open University. Not the Open University. Not the
Hello and welcome back to the Open University. Me and my girlfriend here in Paris both have COVID, or I tested negative for COVID actually, but she tested positive. But we both have something. After a kind of art week, an arty week, in which we saw the Internationale fair. It's the week of Art Basel Paris, but we don't like that. We don't go to that. It's too snobby and boring. The sort of blue chip galleries are all showing there in the Grand Palais. We go to this funky telephonic exchange in near the Boulevard Montparnasse, I guess, and that's got a very much more bobo art fair going on, which is called the Internationale. Finished on Sunday actually, and I always get a real rush of excitement from that. I usually know at least one gallerist, which is the Musical Rosen Gallery in Tokyo. They weren't there this year. Don't know where. I think they were in Singapore actually while this was happening. But it's a roster of fine young up and coming galleries, alternative galleries. And I find it worth visiting. So we went with my old Paris friends Gilles and Flo. So that was exciting, and it followed what was an exciting art time in Berlin, because there was the Berlin Art Week just before I came back to Paris in the beginning of October. So, and then after this we've got Manifesta in Barcelona, which we hope to go to. The trains are a bit expensive. I'm just looking at train prices for Manifesta, which is held in this triple chimneyed power station. It was going to be, I think it was built as a power station, but never actually opened as one. I'm not sure, on the beach. So Manifesta is always quite interesting. I saw it in Belgium once. I saw it in, where else have I seen it? Northern Italy, in Bolzano kind of area, where it usually goes to in post-industrial areas which are having problems adapting to today's labor of creating culture instead of objects. I'm just watching a Catherine Liu video yesterday where she talks about how the US manufacturing output used to be measured by weight, and it got less and less weighty as time went by, and basically as the jobs, the working class jobs, blue collar as they say there, were exported to Asia, more and more of, designed by Apple in California. It's an idea. That's got no weight at all. The actual weight of the objects that are in your Apple computers and phones and things are coming from Taiwan, basically, for the time being anyway. Who knows in the next few years if they'll still be coming from Taiwan. They might be coming from Vietnam. Anyway, so it's part of a dematerialization of labor, you could say. Manifesta, it pops up, I think it was in Ljubljana or somewhere like that last time, Slovenia, over there somewhere. And now it's in Barcelona, which you wouldn't think of as a post-industrial site, but I guess the power station does make it that. So we're hoping to go there maybe in mid-November. The Manifesta closes at the end of November. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind of art, visual art. At the same time, I have a new album out, which is my AI/K-pop album. We're just waiting nervously for the first reviews of that. Byte FM wrote a nice thing. A lot of blurbs, kind of, which are just rewritten press releases, are appearing. It's obviously topical because AI is kind of the ballyhoo of this year. That's why I called it ballyhoo. And it's getting a certain amount of notice, and but we're waiting for actual genuine reviews of people saying, is this any good? Is this cheating? Is this plagiarism? Is this a collaboration with the forces of evil? Or is it an interesting new way to approach a neutral, which is what I like to think it is. I've, in the meantime, been doing, thanks to my Patreon, my new Patreon, and thank you everybody who's joined that, who's actually contributing on a monthly basis to that. I've been doing a series of cover versions, and for $100 a pop, you could order a cover versions. So I think I've got now like an album's worth of these cover versions, which people have asked for. Only one of them I chose myself, and that was a Frank Tovey / Fad Gadget song, which I'd just come across watching documentaries about Frank Tovey. Didn't know much about him apart from collapsing new buildings and that kind of thing, which he'd recorded at Hansa Studios. Obviously a huge Bowie fan, going to Hansa like all those Bowie fans used to in the 80s, because Bowie had recorded there in 77.
Come here, baby, in front of the fire. I'd like to look into your eyes. Loosen your clothes, get out of that seat. Come and feel my body heat. 'Cause I'm just a spy in the house of love.
The others are all suggestions of songs which I mostly didn't know, like the Mayo Thompson song. I think I'd heard that album once, possibly. Robert Dye asked for To You. And my editor, literary editor of the years, Jeremy M. Davis, asked for The Hell of It from the Phantom of the Paradise soundtrack, which I'd never heard. I vaguely heard the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I'd never seen or heard the Phantom of the Paradise. So that's kind of a glam rock, American style kind of Broadway glam rock, a horrible funeral eulogy, a little bit like the one that John Cleese gave at the funeral of Graham Chapman. You know, hope the bugger burns, you know, and he can piss off. This kind of thing which made everybody laugh, and which would have made Graham laugh if he'd been there at his own funeral.
'Cause we were never being boring. We had too much time to find for ourselves, and we were never being boring. We dressed up and fought that thought make amends, and we were never holding back or worried that time would come to an end. We were always hoping that, looking back, you could always rely on a friend.
So yeah, I enjoyed the challenges of that, because other people construct songs differently and use different chords, and you know, I think the hardest one has been the Sudden Sway song. The last one I did, that took a long time because I just couldn't really summon the kind of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. It sounds strange to compare Sudden Sway to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, but there is a kind of mainstream glossy pop. They were on Warner's at the time. Mike Always somehow sold the package through Blanco y Negro to Warner Brothers in the UK to release this very conceptual band who are a bit like the Residents or Ronaldo and the Loaf. You know, kind of, it's like putting Ronaldo and the Loaf on a big label and saying, make some kind of ironic pop hits. It's sort of almost an attempt to do a Scrittipaliti thing. But yeah, because I couldn't really, you know, darling, let's form a band, I couldn't really find the persona in myself who would sing, even ironically, darling, let's form a band. Actually, I found later that there were 8 different versions of this song. This Sudden Sway song that I'd covered, and some of them were much more conducive, much more the kind of thing I could have sung. I think version 2 was pretty good. I couldn't hear all 8 of them. They don't seem to be on YouTube. That's the main source I use. But that was really hard production-wise. I didn't really find a production that I liked on that, because it was so sort of sub Trevor Horn. Released in 1986 to very little applause or acknowledgement even from the mainstream it was attempting to conquer. You know, I mean, a lot of bands have done this kind of thing in the 80s, like the Associates. The Fourth Drawer Down album was the result of a series of essentially failed singles which were released bam, 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 you know, one after the other. Magazine even did that. They released an awful lot of singles from the Correct Use of Soap, I think, had a lot of singles with B-sides and things which didn't chart. So this project, you know, doing these cover versions, it could be infinite. It could go on and on, because it's actually really fun for me. I'm very productive. I loved having something to get my teeth into, and the Patreon platform is actually very useful for people just saying I've got a request. I was thinking I could extend it into city tours, you know, for $1,000 you could spend a couple of days with me showing you around, not showing you around necessarily, but accompanying you, taking photographs on a city tour of the city of your choice. Even if it's a city I don't know, Mogadishu, you could show me around Mogadishu and I'd be taking photographs. It would be like a photographic walking tour. It'd have to be a walkable city, hopefully, if there are any of those. You know, the candlelit dinners and things. There are all sorts of things you can do at the different tiers. I'm not really a big one for that, though. I like the more democratic approach to Patreon, which is just, you know, bung me $5 a month and I'll do something interesting and find things in my archives. I don't have access to my archives here in Paris so much. I've got a few things squirreled away in folders to amuse you with. But I can't actually go back to my old cassette tapes and, you know, find old stuff while I'm here. So I have to focus more on the present, which suits me fine because I'm a very present-oriented kind of person. As all the visual art shenanigans really should tell you, that's my way, that's my barometer, which I use to get the sense of what the times are like. I'm not going to do topical. Actually, Substack would be another good platform to be on. I should probably get back into writing, because I do mention in the video that launches the Patreon that I'm thinking of getting back into writing essays and things. I've kind of stopped writing essays and I really want to get back into that. I used to do a lot more journalism, which opened me up to, you know, other people's ideas and other people's ways of thinking and what was going on in the world. That's an important part of what I do. So this could be a venue for that. And some people make a ton of money on Substack writing essays, which is something I used to do for magazines, but I haven't really had the commissions. I don't know if it's that the magazines don't exist anymore, or there's a certain phase, I think it's more like a certain phase in the existence of every magazine in which they want the kind of insights and credibility that someone like me can lend to them, and then they move on. They get big advertising accounts, and, you know, Loewe or whatever you say, however you pronounce this, these luxury brands start advertising with them. I'm thinking of 32C magazine or Apartamento magazine, or all these mags I used to contribute to, say 10, 15 years ago. Art magazines more recently, like Moose. They all sort of drift towards luxury advertising. And then, you know, they don't need the cred anymore. They don't need the kind of quirkiness anymore, which I provide in articles for magazines. So I stopped getting the calls. I stopped getting the emails saying, hey, would you like to contribute to this art magazine? I was thinking actually of a topic for these talks on YouTube, these videos on YouTube, to talk about my art career. I could call it Art Decade, and it would be a description of my basically 10 years of being an artist in the art world. I'm thinking about that because I'm friends here in Paris with Cindy Green, who is a member of Fischerspooner. So we used to hang out, you know, 20 years ago when I lived in New York. I say hang out, I mean I was a hanger-on really to the electroclash scene. This was, in Bowie terms, this was, you know, me discovering drum and bass or something. I kept asking them, Casey Spooner, the singer in Fischerspooner, you know, why are you so obsessed with Sigue Sigue Sputnik? Because he had this mullet and diamante clothes and stuff, and he looked a bit like the Martin Degville from Sigue Sigue Sputnik. You know, that was my term of reference for it. Why are you reviving the 80s? And he really hadn't even listened to Sigue Sigue Sputnik. It was an accidental stylist kind of error, if you like, that had made him look a bit like Martin Degville. On the cover of Index magazine in 2001, whatever it was. He could look like a lot of different people. He took to wearing turbans and looking like a Sikh taxi driver and all sorts of other things. But yeah, because I interviewed Fischerspooner for this disc that I did back in about 2000, which was Fakeway's Manhattan Folk, it was called, and it was a documentary that was even transmitted on the radio, and it was sold at Other Music. That was the golden discs, because Thomas Jerome Newton, when he lands, an alien Englishman, lands in America, he sells rings. He suddenly reveals that he's got like 100 wedding rings. So my wedding rings were these silver discs, which I burned myself at home and then sold at Other Music, of this documentary. selling coals to Newcastleians, because this was a scene which I just stumbled across myself and didn't know much about. There was vaguely a Berlin connection because it was DJ Hell, and people were the first to pick up on Electroclash. There was a guy called Larry T who put out a compilation, the Electroclash compilation, and named the movement. The bands were all slightly resentful about that. I was as much interested in the folk, sort of synth folk, Casio tone folk stuff that was going on with bands like Centuries, who were from Staten Island. And Aura Ford Wright, who was making weird kind of operas, rock operas, a bit like Jesus Christ Superstar, of his own devising 70s retro rock operas, which Cindy was also in. So Cindy sang all these songs in weird little theatres south of Canal Street, in Ford Wright's operas. So anyway, yeah, she moved to Paris, and she's in the process of buying a flat up in the near the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Denis, which is a very lively multi-ethnic area. And she finds Paris more interesting now than New York, and definitely better value. If you're going to buy an apartment in New York, why not buy one in Paris? Much more interesting and nicer. So we've been hanging out a bit here and reminiscing inevitably about the good old days of Electroclash back in New York, but also agreeing that New York is probably less interesting now. There's less of that cultural ferment because you have to earn more money to live in New York, and therefore it becomes all dollar-oriented. The art world in New York is supposedly a lot less interesting than when I was in the Whitney Biennial and all the rest of it. I just played around on the fringes of the art world. I was there for a decade or so. I had 3 shows with a guy called Zach Foyer. So actually one of Cindy's friends who came in for the art stuff that was happening last week was also with Zach Foyer Gallery. Zach has gone out of the art. Well, he was like doing a bicycle rental business in upstate New York for a while after his time as a gallerist. And then now he's come back into art advising, telling rich people which blue chip art to put their money into, this kind of thing. So he's moved with the times, you could say. I'm just looking at my Tumblr page to see what else I can tell you that's been happening. I saw this Tilda Swinton talk a week or so ago with my friend Gilles, who always goes to these panel discussions. He's French. Very French in the sense that he's got religion about cinema, and the French love to go to panel discussions where people show films and then talk about them for hours. So there was a bill of short films at the Pompidou Centre, I think 8 short films, all about 10 minutes each. Things like the Norman McLaren film of neighbours with a picket fence fighting. It's all kind of sped up and a comic kind of take on war. And then they discuss it, whether this panel with Tilda calls him Joe, but it's actually the Thai director I can never pronounce his name. A.W. Known as Joe to his friends, Apothirak Wisachang, something like that. So they were discussing all these films very reverently, even these rather scribbly little animations, which you wouldn't think there's much to say about, got discussed at enormous length. So you needed a strong bladder to sit there without rushing away. But Tilda is always very lucid. I met her, the only time I've met her, my friend Edwin was actually posing for photographs with her afterwards, but I just sort of slunk away because I have met her at the launch of Derek Jarman's War Requiem film in 1987 at Smithfield Meat Market with Simon Turner, who's a good friend of hers. And it was Simon who commissioned me to sing in Derek's last film, Derek Jarman's last film. So she talks a lot about Derek Jarman, and the theme of this short film bill was narrative versus post-narrative kind of film directors who don't trust narrative or want to do something a bit different with narrative. And Tilda was saying, well, narrative is their job, the story is their job. People like Wes Anderson or whoever she works with, she leaves that up to them. Her job is to do the more indefinable thing of projecting emotion or putting real life or atmosphere into these films. That's what an actor does. The actor doesn't make up the story. The actor does make up the emotional resonance, though, and filling the space in between the lines, in a sense. So the short film featuring her by her friend Joe, the Thai director, was just a study which he'd done off the cuff when she was in Singapore, I think, and he had filmed her doing nothing, a bit like an Andy Warhol screen test, just sitting there in a room. And she said watching it for the first time since they'd made it together, she could sense that she was in mourning for the father of her children, as she puts it, which is John Byrne, the Scottish film playwright and visual artist with whom she had her children, her twins, who are now 27 years old, but who was not, I don't think they were married, and she was the partner of this younger German guy who would accompany her around the world while John stayed home in the Highlands, where they lived in a very remote, she still lives in this very remote place in Sutherland or somewhere up in the north of Scotland. So that was interesting, because narrative and escaping the traps of narrative is something that I really think about a lot, because how do you tell a story in a song? It's kind of boring to tell a short story in a straightforward way in a song. You can do it in a broken kind of way, more interestingly perhaps. When I've written longer length books, the narrative tends to be pretty scatty and crazy and not really add up too much. It doesn't make sense. It's just shooting off in all different directions, because I mistrust narrative that's glib, that's too easy, that's pointing up morals, that's trying to make you cry, or trying to get a certain emotional reaction from you. I would rather confuse a cat, as Monty Python used to say. But I was going to say, there was a book I was looking at in this same bookshop yesterday, which is I Wish I Was Stupid by Ebisu Yoshikazu. So I started watching this YouTube channel called Famicom Collects. Very good YouTube channel, getting fewer views than I get even, or about the same number of views that I get, of a guy in Australia who's a huge fan of this kind of manga, alternative manga, including Yuichi Yokoyama, who's my favorite, and really the only manga artist I do follow, this guy. Voyage author Yuichi Yokoyama, and this is very non-narrative. It's absolutely autistic in the refusal of narrative. Apparently, I didn't realize this, but watching these videos by this Australian guy, some of these frames are all like 5 seconds apart in the life of the characters on the train here. So 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds. Apparently, there's a very strict time keeping elements to Yuichi Yokoyama, which just underlines my suspicion that he's somewhat autistic, but there's a kind of just a vision you won't get anywhere else. It really escapes both the narrative cliches and the drawing cliches of just about any other manga. But what I like about manga, especially a lot of the Garu magazine or the X magazine, I think it's called, these are the two main journals of manga in Japan. I love the perversity, obviously. I like the fact that it's all about the kind of weird, twisted fantasy lives of human beings, and there is no kind of moral judgment or kind of pat explanation, or it's just surreal and strange and bizarre things that happen all the time. Talking of surreal, there's a big surrealism exhibition at the Pompidou Centre, which I haven't seen because I'm slightly bored with blue chip surrealism, the greats of the 20th century, Dali and all the rest of them. Pretty bored with that. Not so bored with the surrealism that crops up in manga, post-1960s Japanese manga. So this figure, I'd never heard of this guy before, Ebisu Yoshikazu, but definitely would like to read this, I Wish I Was Stupid. Great title, and I just love the pathology of that, the no holds barred. We live in mealy-mouthed times where people are very keen to appear to be on the right side of moral questions and to be appropriate at all times, and that's terribly boring and terribly constricting. And I think manga is a good way to escape those moral strictures and that mediocrity. Pretty much all I have to say. except for the fact that this cap made of straw suits me quite well. Goodbye.
Open University.
Open University. Not the Open University. Not the Open University. Not the Open University.